Hello, my name is Shireen John and I'm Communications Coordinator with the London International Development Centre, which is a consortium of a number of higher education institutions and NGOs based here in London. Today, I am very honoured to be joined in conversation from Freetown, Sierra Leone, by Yvonne Sawyerr, OBE, who has been Mayor of Freetown since 2018. Yvonne and I both grew up in Freetown, and together with other Sierra Leoneans around the world, I have been watching with keen interest and more than a little admiration as Yvonne has bravely tackled all manner of challenges in her quest to make Sierra Leone's capital city a better place to live. Yvonne has, rightly in my opinion, received numerous plaudits for work that she has done to help fellow Sierra Leoneans. In 2015, she was awarded an Ebola Gold Medal by the then President of Sierra Leone, Ernest Bai Koroma, and she was made an Officer of the Order of the British Empire, OBE, to you and me, by Queen Elizabeth II in January 2016. Her many achievements led to her being named as one of the BBC's 100 women in 2020. And just last year, 2021, she was named as one of the 100 next honorees by the prestigious Time magazine. So welcome, Mayor, and thank you very much for joining us today. Could you begin by telling us a little bit about your background and specifically what it was that motivated you to return to Sierra Leone and run for mayoral office?
Thank you so much, Shireen. It's a real pleasure to be here. And as you've said rightly, we grew up in Freetown, and I have such fond memories of our childhood. It was a really green city. I did a lot of tree climbing, fishing in streams, swimming on the beach on a Sunday, and indeed some days straight after school. And in the years post those very idyllic memories, Freetown, Sierra Leone, in fact, as a country, endured a civil war, which led to huge influx of people from the rural areas into the city, putting enormous pressure on the infrastructure of the city, but also on its natural landscape. In the years after the war, that rural urban migration continued. It continued when Ebola happened, and I'll come back to that. It continued and continues as a result of climate change and the impact that that's had on rural farmers. But it's also continued because of a lack of investment, adequate investment, particularly I would say in the last 4 years, into services and jobs outside of the capital. So what has that meant? It's meant that Freetown is overpopulated. It's meant that we've seen huge deforestation, which challenges water supply and service delivery generally. I've been passionate about Sierra Leone for as long as I can remember. I've been involved in charities since university days. I got involved in Ebola, set up a not-for-profit, working with children. And Shireen, I'm pretty sure you've been to Battersea Park for one of our 5K runs. We used to do sponsored runs in the early days from 1999 until probably in the mid-2000s. And then I also have been investing in business with my husband, building what will be the first true 5-star hotel in Sierra Leone. In the midst of all of this, Ebola happened. And I found myself unable to watch from the sidelines. I stepped forward to get involved, to volunteer and to be part of the response. And that led to me packing my bags and getting on a plane on the 13th of November, 2014, for what I thought was a 3-month period. The outbreak did not end until the 7th of November, 2015. I was here for a year. And in that year, and with the work that we did, it resulted in me being asked to stay on and support the post-Ebola recovery program of the president and of the government. When you invested so much and you can see that you have an opportunity to make a difference, you do. You step forward, and that could mean leaving a lot behind that you hadn't really bargained for. 18 months into that experience, I saw again with elections for mayor coming up that a lot of the challenges that I have described earlier on, stemming from rural urban migration, are then compounded if they exist within a context of poor systems or maybe non-existent systems, and perhaps a lack of a comprehensive, clear intersectoral plan to deal with not just some of the underlying causes, which you may not be able to address as a city, but certainly consequences across sectors such as the environment, transport, housing, sanitation, and health. So it was seeing that opportunity while seeing the devastating impact of deforestation and poor waste management, and having some friends kind of prod me along, that led to the decision that I made in about May 2017 to run for office the following year, having never been involved in politics prior, having not been a member of a political party, and having zero experience of what it would mean to run for office. But I did it, and I guess what I proposed to residents of the city that I would seek to deliver resonated, and so I won. And here I am, almost 4 years on, and we are well on our way to implement the plan that we designed as a collective to address those challenges. And I'm really grateful.
Thank you. And as a Sierra Leonean, I'm very grateful that you've done this. You mentioned in your answer just now that when you're asked to step up, that you do, and you did, but actually not everybody can or would. So it's been quite an unusual step. It's impressed a lot of us because we are, as Sierra Leoneans, aware that you're stepping into a zone which has gone from being, as you mentioned, a wonderful place to grow up. I grew up in Freetown, but I also spent a lot of time in the northern provinces, in Kono, in Yengema, which was just wonderful. And as we know, in Kono is where a lot of the civil war was at its worst because it's a diamond mining area. So you've moved into a post-conflict situation with low resources where the infrastructure has basically collapsed. People have lost faith in the political system. We've also seen our glorious beaches survive, but not in the state that they once were. Sand is removed for building. We've seen the hills around Freetown, from which Freetown got its name, Lion Mountain. We've seen them deforested, which hasn't helped with mudslides. We've seen climate change, which has led to flooding of the type that we never had at all growing up in Freetown. And then on top of all of that, we had Ebola, malaria, and now COVID-19. So, beautiful country, beautiful people, lots of challenges. Which of Freetown's many challenges, oh, and I forgot to even talk about waste management. Which of the many challenges do you see as the most pressing, and why?
Okay, so Shireen, I want to just pick up on something you said about our childhood, and I think it really is important for me to say this because it's impacting a lot of what we're seeing today. We were really fortunate. That's what I've come to learn. I began to see that when I went to university. I didn't see it at school. And now that I'm in this position of governance, and in the years just before that, with the work that I did in Ebola, which took me right around the country, I realized that we were in a bit of a bubble. Those of us who were the children of professionals, living in Freetown in the 80s, 70s and 80s, probably saw the best that this country had to offer. Even if we had, sort of just average means, we were still surrounded by beauty and safety. And that was not actually the case for many people in the rest of the country. And what that divide, that disparity of access to opportunity was one of the things that fed the Civil War. And one of the issues we see today as we move forward is that the divide is still there, different type of divide, different people who have access to resources, or let's say, I wouldn't put it quite the same. It's a very different situation. It's not a question of, those who were in Freetown and lived in Freetown, because really the difference then was Freetown and the provinces. Now it's within the city, and you've got these differences. And you asked me, what do I see as most pressing? I would say there are three things which I feel absolutely need to be addressed. One of them is outside of my control as mayor, and that's what I started off with: stemming the flow of rural-urban migration and giving people options and opportunities outside of Freetown. Because our city, urbanization is a concept, it's a phenomenon which is worldwide. In fact, the UN and the World Bank have stated that by 2050, 75% of the world's population will live in cities. 90% of that growth is going to happen in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Fact, it's a given. Those are the projections. How that urbanization impacts the lives of those already in cities and those coming to cities is dependent on one of those three issues that I'm about to mention. So I've already said, we absolutely need to ensure that opportunities are being created outside the capital city, because we know Freetown, you've mentioned Lion Mountain, Sierra Leone, Freetown is surrounded by mountains and the sea. So there's pretty much nowhere to go. When growth is happening, you're not just spreading and sprawling. Accra is growing rapidly, but Accra is on a plain, it's flat, and that growth can just keep on going. With us, you're going uphill. And with that uphill growth, deforestation on slopes leads to landslides, leads to mudslides, leads to destruction of the water catchment areas. The growth towards the ocean leads to banking of our mangrove swamps, destroys biodiversity, destroys where the fishes are spawned. And literally our growth exacerbates the risk of natural disasters, which are already on the increase because of a global climate change and global warming. So we're not in the same place. We are regarded now as one of the top 3 countries in the world susceptible to natural disasters. And that's really impacted by what I've just described. So my 3, I'm not giving you 1, I'm giving you 3. Top priorities: environmental management, which goes hand in glove with addressing deforestation and waste management, sanitation. 2, urban planning and housing, because that drive, that flow of people, no matter what's done tomorrow, it's already happened today and yesterday. And it's going to take a big investment to see a depopulation of a city. In the meantime, we must improve the standard of living, the quality of life, and the housing provision and access to same for those people, the 35% plus of our residents who are living in slums, informal settlements that have been created along the shore and along the mountain. Failure to impact those people's lives actually guarantees the long-term failure of our city, maybe even the medium-term failure, because those natural disasters will continue and they'll be exacerbated. And some of the consequences are just very difficult to reverse. And the third is what I've said is outside of my control. As a city mayor, I'm not investing in jobs, but central government must invest. We have a government whose manifesto said they were going to build a factory in every district. That would be a good place to start. Create jobs so that there are alternatives and opportunities outside of the city. So what is it that we can do? We can do, and we are doing, work with the first. Freetown, the Tree Town is our campaign to not only plant, but grow 1 million trees in and around the city. We have planted and we are growing, and I say grow because we monitor the trees. If you go to our tree tracker app, every tree has a unique identifying number. Every tree is tracked in the app. We've planted 557,000 trees. We've just received funding through a competition that we won with Bloomberg Global Mayors Challenge, which will provide us with $1 million to enable us to plant the next 450,000 trees. And with that, we will also continue our growing program, which means we're creating jobs for young people. Previously, 600 jobs in the direct jobs, because there are also indirect jobs created through the nurseries for those planted in the first phase. And now with this additional funding, there'll be another 600 or so jobs as we grow and monitor the trees for the next 3 to 6 years. We've also developed a platform for impact investing, which will eventually lead to us being able to be on the market for carbon offsets. So we're addressing that deforestation, and we're addressing the water challenges by protecting the catchment areas, by planting on the hillsides, holding the roots holding the soil, reducing the runoff and therefore reducing the risk of landslides, planting, regenerating mangroves. But all of this is also still at risk without urban planning and housing. We're working on developing a building permit regime, which is environmentally sensitive, a local area plans for the city. But unfortunately, we will not be able to implement any of this until the government devolves this function to the councils. It is actually, according to the Local Government Act, a function which should be, it is in law, devolved to the councils. But for your listeners who live in London and in other parts of the world, I'm sure they'll be shocked to hear that unlike what happens in Kennington Borough or Wandsworth or Chelsea or Hackney, the local authority does not issue building permits. It's actually centrally held, and it pretty much doesn't happen, which means you see people building anything, anywhere, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. So people are building structures in rivers, in waterways, even in canals, in gutters, blocking them. So we're pushing in one direction, but without the mandate being given to us, we're planning, but we can't implement. So in short, Shireen, Transform Freetown has 11 priority sectors. I've highlighted 3, which are really, really pressing, or 2 which are really pressing, but I've also highlighted a 3rd issue, which is out beyond our control, but which impacts everything. This paints a gloomy picture, but I want to say that in spite of these challenges, we have actually been astonished by the progress we've actually made. Progress, not just with tree planting, not just with the introduction of a waste management system. This morning, before I came onto this call, we just launched a waste collection management association of young people who are now waste collectors. So people think garbage collecting, you often think of garbage collecting and you think of your typical big compacted trucks in the UK moving from neighborhood to neighborhood with one or two people, in the cab, coming out, picking up your garbage and tipping it into the back. Well, for us, waste collection was a really significant problem. And it was one where that system I've just described that you're also familiar with would not have worked. As a result, we had only 21% of solid waste being collected when I came into the city. So picture that, 21%, that means 79% of the garbage generated never makes it to a dump site. It's in the community, it's on the streets, it's in waterways. And we set ourselves a challenge to ensure that we increase that from 21% to at least 60% by this year. To do that, we've worked right along the value chain. We've introduced things like the cleanest zone competition in communities. We've introduced sanitation patrol. We've introduced enforcement, increased enforcement, working with local communities. But we've also introduced a scheme, and I was down with the young people today, which has enabled us to bring on board and create over 1,500 jobs for young people. Our tricycle groups. So we've provided through funding from various donors, EU, IOM, Mayors Migration Council, at the moment, 120 tricycles. So imagine a motorbike with a cart at the back and 3 wheels. And that's your garbage collection. And young people taking this up as a business and being able to run it as a business, because what the council is doing is providing the enabling environment. In changing our legislation to make it compulsory for everyone to have a household waste collector, creating an app called findmeinfreetown.com, where all of these guys are registered, and you can sit in your house, go on your phone, and when you put in findmeinfreetown.com, it comes up with your location and a list of who the waste collectors are in your area. So you can be linked very easily to garbage collectors in your area. And this means we've moved from only 3,000 households registered for waste collection, because it's not wrapped into your council tax at the moment. That's where we want to get to next year. We've moved from 3,000 to over 50,000 households now registered. So we now have the streets being swept, and you think, isn't that obvious? Shouldn't streets be swept every day? Well, we didn't have that system. We do now. So through these different interventions, we're creating jobs, we're cleaning our city, and we're meeting our objective collectively as Freetonians to transform Freetown.
Wow. Look where you make our blue. Wow. Gosh, you've actually answered a lot of the questions I was going to follow up with. I'm not going to reiterate anything that you said, but congratulations on all of this, particularly the use of new technology and winning the Under Bloomberg competition. I just wanted to make a couple of other points. One of which is that another challenge that has arisen over the past few years is the fact that Britain, we know there's lots of debates right now around the colonial legacy and so on and so forth. And in fact, you referred to growing up in a bubble, and the life that my siblings and I grew up in Yangamal was very much a bubble. It was basically a British managed National Diamond Mining Company. But, Britain has for a long time profited in a number of ways from what it's taken from the colonies. So I have, although I work in the global development sector, I have a lot of personal misgivings around terms like aid and development aid and so on and so forth. And we know that under this current political party that's running Britain right now, aid, in inverted commas, was cut from a mere 0.7%, I'll repeat, 0.7% of GDP in all international aid was cut by 0.2%. That obviously had a knock-on effect on the ex-colonies and other countries that were receiving this so-called aid. So I just kind of wanted to mention that as well. The other thing that I wanted to mention, you've talked a lot about the environmental challenges, and you are right, infrastructure needs to be repaired and or put in place. Climate change is a factor. Deforestation is a factor. I was horrified last time I went home to see along Lumley Beach Road that wonderful, mysterious mangrove completely ripped up and replaced by massive houses that are white elephants, basically, because nobody can afford to live in them, and they've just destroyed the environment there. So that's really distressing. But I want to put this in some kind of context as well, because I was reading an article recently which stated that New York State alone, the carbon emissions from New York State alone exceed all of those from sub-Saharan Africa. So I think we have to, I work in global development. LIDC is a global development organization. So we have to put this in a global context. One American state creates more environmental damage than all of sub-Saharan Africa. And sub-Saharan Africa, particularly countries like Ghana, we know, are used for toxic waste dumps for a lot of countries in the global north. So I just wanted to mention those things.
I wanted to say something, just if I may, Rasheen, on that last point. You're absolutely right. It varies, the statistics, but one of the ones that I use based on the credibility of the source is a mere 3 to 4% of global emissions comes from sub-Saharan Africa. Others say it's 12%, but I go 3 to 4%, and that is sometimes sort of taken as, so it's not a problem for us. Well, I'll tell you something. When we talk about climate change and we talk about us actually responding and mitigating, there are two things which we mustn't lose sight of. One is the reality of the consequences of climate change hit us far more than they hit the emitters, because we don't have the resilience. So when there is heavy rainfall, I was in the UK in the summer, and we drove for a walk down in, where did we go? It was somewhere down in Surrey, and we drove through this little village, and there was a bit of flooding, and the water was coming to our car, and it was like, oh wow, this is happening. And I think that was the same day the train stations flooded, or the day before. But it's gone in a flash. Whereas the consequences of flooding here are much more severe, because you don't have the infrastructure to deal with it as well. That's the same that we saw Germany, China, etc. But you're not talking about that flooding anymore, because it's all been dealt with. So the ability to withstand the consequences and the extreme weather impacts when you are subsistence farmers, you have a bad rain. If you don't have rain when you're supposed to have it, or you have heavy rain when you're not supposed to have it, you could have your crop, your harvest wiped out. You've got no cushion, you've got no reserve, you've got nothing to lean back on. But significantly as well, Shireen, extreme heat is something we're experiencing in the city now. And that is a silent killer. Those informal settlements I mentioned, these slum communities, which actually account for over 35% of our population. The housing material for them is corrugated iron. It's corrugated iron sheets, zinc sheets. It's like living in an oven. So the health impact is terrible, not to mention the smog and the respiratory diseases. So when we talk about climate, and we don't talk about it because we feel we're the worst emitters. No way. We absolutely are not. We are the victims. We're the victims because the global climate impacts are affecting our temperature, and that affects health, air pollution. But then on the other hand, we have localized activities which are exacerbating climate action or climate change, which are also devastating for us. In this last 3 years, there has been more deforestation outside of the city than I believe we've seen in the last 15 or 20 years. So you see Freetown, but if you go up to Kenema or you go to Kabbalah, Kabbalah is experiencing flooding. I mean, Kabbalah used to be cold. Kabbalah is experiencing heat. And there's been a policy which has basically allowed timber export all year round. And that has been devastating. So I totally agree with you. And I was on a panel during COP26 where I gave this analogy in terms of the role and the responsibility of the global north vis-a-vis the global south when it comes to expenditure for climate action, and particularly for climate adaptation, which is required now. And my analogy was, if you have a limousine, a Bentley, and you're going along the M25, and you run into me on my bicycle, who should pay the damages? The Bentleys are asking us all to pay for the damage that's being done to their Bentley, but my bike has been crushed and I don't have the resources in the first place. So this conversation was supposed to have been had more concretely and with better outcomes than it was had at COP26. Let's hope that COP27, there's more focus given and more money put on the table to support the countries of the global south whose bicycles have been damaged by Bentleys that they don't own.
Thank you. Brilliantly put. Thank you. So I'm going to talk now about citizenship, if you like, and involving people in their own healthcare and so on. As we know, pretty much everyone in Sierra Leone and in the global south, it would seem, has a mobile phone. And this morning I was listening to BBC World Service, and they were reporting on a project which has involved Freetown players, which, as you know, they are a wonderful cultural group. And what Freetown players are doing is they are recording drama skits around basically with the idea of correcting misinformation around public health. And the particular item that I was listening to, and if people want to look out for it, it's a program run by BBC World Service called People Fixing the World. And in today's edition, they were talking about Freetown players recording skits in Creole, which is our local languages, giving out correct information about typhoid and malaria, both of which continue to afflict people, particularly in West Africa. And one of the problems that we have in Sierra Leone is that some people have come to believe that there is a condition called typhoid malaria, that there's different types of malarias, one of which is typhoid malaria. Typhoid malaria is not a thing. It doesn't exist. Typhoid exists, malaria exists, typhoid malaria doesn't exist. So these audio recordings are being, the thing that I found really astounding is that these audio recordings are being shared through WhatsApp. And I know that during the Ebola epidemic, there were recordings, health messages sent out via radio, and there were billboards put up. So, and I've also seen you acting, Nopi Snayo, preventing gentlemen from relieving themselves in the sidewalk. So I just want to ask you on your opinion on how you think the media and the arts in general can be used to promote public health messages in a country like Sierra Leone and a city like Freetown?
I think we have a huge role for public health messages, indeed for all messages. And you're right, I've taken to TikTok to get sanitation messages across because, you know, it's what people look at. And it's, you need to speak to your residents where your residents are listening. So we use WhatsApp. Today I've just had a chat with a colleague. Our property rate cycle has just begun. We've sent out demand notices, and we'll be doing short videos and putting them on WhatsApp to get the message across. So the arts play a big role. I have Transform Freetown ambassadors who are a combination of musicians, ex-beauty queen, beauty pageant queen Miss Sierra Leone from 2018. I also have a TikTok influencer, someone with 1 million followers, and there are about 8 of them. And when we want to do messages, you know, I pull them in, you know, and they help me get messages across to our audience. So it's an effective way, because at the end of the day, your message is best received in the way that people want to receive messages or generally receive messages. There's no point you using a channel that no one is listening to.
Thank you. That's brilliant. And one thing I noticed when I was living in Sierra Leone in the 90s, really, there was an attempt then to have a Clean Up Freetown campaign. And I think for a lot of people, the willingness to get involved really is there. But what happens is sometimes they come up against these opposition. People try to do the right thing and they meet opposition, and it can be very discouraging for people. And sometimes they don't even know why the opposition is there. And sometimes the opposition comes because people are being secretly funded to, you know, stop certain things happening that are for the common good and so on. And we know that this happens, you know, right throughout the world. It's just a feature of political life. And I was interested last time I was back home to see that there was a hotline set up. I think it was about if you're asked for a bribe, ring 555 or something like that. And I think that the next day after that happened, I was being driven around in a car, and the car was stopped, and basically we were asked to pay in order to be able to move the car. So it's an uphill battle, but one that citizens around the world, and particularly in countries like Sierra Leone, do face. What words of advice or encouragement or thoughts do you have on this sort of issue?
So
it's a big one, I realize.
So almost 4 years in, it will be I'll be celebrating my 4th year as mayor in May, so just a few months from now. I think there's some lessons I've learned, and some of the things that we did were intuitive, coming from my experience during Ebola, coming from my private sector background. And I would say that I feel that the reason for our success, one of the main reasons for our success, is the fact that we had a clearly articulated plan with measurable targets and a prioritized agenda, and we communicate. So if you wake me up in the middle of the night, I can tell you our 19 targets. And so you're driven. You're going to have the obstacles. You're going to have the challenges. But if you know where you've set your goal to, or what you've set as a goal, where you're going, what you're determined to achieve, then when those challenges come, you may be knocked off a little bit, but you know exactly where you need to go back to keep moving forward. And going through that process, which was a participatory process, and which involved a lot of technical input, expert input. That process that we went through, when I came into office in May 18, through to launching Transform Freetown in January 2019 really provides us with a compass. So I would say, yes, we live in a polarized world, increasingly so, very difficult and challenging political landscapes all over the place. In all, the global north is not excluded from this. But if you're in public office, or indeed if you are just an interested citizen, be about, probably easier for you in public office because you probably have more of a mandate, but even in your own space, maybe in what you do, if you're an NGO or a civil society activist, be clear about what it is you feel you can achieve. In designing Transform Freetown, I often say, we say Transform Freetown, we do believe in transformation, but we know that we're not addressing all the problems. We know we can't possibly in 4 or 5 years address all the problems, but we want to make enough of an impact through these pre-agreed 19 targets that we move the needle, that there is a sense that something is different. So be clear about what you want to do, and then be like a bulldog in going for it. We definitely have had our challenges, and they continue. As I sit here speaking to you, they are very real. But there's also that sense of collective good. As you are consistent, you'll be surprised the dots that become joined, the numbers of people around you who will see the big picture, who will look at what's best for the common good, and who will come alongside as you come alongside them. Collaboration, cooperation, hashtag further together. We can do this.
Wonderful. I really do admire your passion. It's very moving and inspiring. We said one pack man come home now.
Come.
So for those of you who don't talk Creole, I said I'm half tempted to pack my bags and go home now. Yeah, but there's the couple more issues, because we've gone around the world, haven't we? We've covered a lot. So thank you so much for your time today. But I think it really would be remiss of me to not talk about the situation that's currently facing Sierra Leone's women and girls. We know that women carry disproportionately the burden of, well, everything really, but particularly two areas that I find most make me angry, if you like. One of those is the fact that Sierra Leone's waters are currently being fished to almost non-existence, and fish that local people depend on are being raked out of the seas and used to feed farmed salmon in the countries of the global north. And we know that women play a huge role in the fishing industry, in the selling, the drying, just the management, sustainable management of fish stocks. Another area is education. The COVID-19 lockdowns, pandemic has really impacted on the education of women and girls. We know that it's led to a spike in teen pregnancies and child growth and child labor and so on. And we know that in our part of the world, girls are still being subjected to genital mutilation, and that this is still happening. So lots of challenges that are unique to being female in our part of the world. What advice would you give to young women who wish to follow in your footsteps in terms of female empowerment, education, being motivated, and just how to get ahead in life, really? So very long question. You may not be able to deal with all the problems of all the women in all of Sierra Leone, but just a general idea.
Right. So what you started off with in terms of illegal fishing, all sorts of fishing that's being allowed to happen is another one of those national government problems that really need to be addressed and can't be swept under the table, because what might appear a short-term gain has long-term disastrous consequences. And so, you know, I add my voice to yours and to that of others to say this is wrong, it shouldn't be allowed to continue. And we really ask our government to step in on this and to do more. We know that there are boats that are supposed to monitor the waters from the Ministry of Fisheries, but we all hear the stories and we all see the impact. So clearly, you know, what needs to be done is not being done. With respect to the disadvantaged position of girls, which is very real, Sierra Leone was named as one of the worst places to be a girl child, to grow up as a girl some years ago. And it's sad that, you know, not enough has changed in that regard. You specifically asked about girls who might look up to me. I've become more aware that when I ran for office, I was not thinking about it from the perspective of becoming a role model for girls or young women. That wasn't on my radar. It now is, because I've realized that inadvertently, I have provided a role model, and that there are many young women and girls, including a little 4-year-old who came to my office like 2 years ago, dressed up and was pretending to be me. She was going to see, she had this program at school. They had to choose a character. She came, didn't have an appointment, but my secretary insisted I see her, and I'm so glad I did. I'll send you the video, Shireen. I captured it. It was so sweet. She read out my whole CV, and then she looked at me, she went, "Who am I?" It was just delightful. And it's really inspired me to be a bit more deliberate about role modeling. So I will, at the end of this month, early February, be launching Yaz Girls Leadership Foundation, which is a foundation through which I will very deliberately visit girls in schools. Our tagline is, "Give them wings, watch them fly." And what we intend to do is to help speak to girls, coach girls on how they can build their confidence and fulfill their potential. So that's a little piece of a bigger picture that many women are stepping into. And I think the more we do, the more women support each other and really support womanhood and girls in Sierra Leone and in Freetown in particular.
Great. Wow. Yeah, I can't wait to see that. Thank you so much, Yvonne. That's brilliant. So I think I know the answer to the next question. We know that there are a lot of very talented Sierra Leoneans who leave and are worried about going home. You've made that move. We can close with this as final question. What would your advice be to those, not just in Sierra Leone, but other countries who are, you know, moved to the diaspora and are considering going home? What would you say to them? And then I'll let you go.
I'll say to them that you should. Everyone has a choice. I'm a dual citizen. I could be living in the UK. I could be living, as my daughter would say, living your best life, just doing whatever I want to do. And I recognize that we all are different personalities, and everyone has, you know, a different threshold of what is acceptable to them. I feel that we come from a country with a lot of opportunity, and many of us benefited, you know, from that in terms of our childhoods, our education. I went to university in Sierra Leone. I went to school in Sierra Leone. I'm a product of Sierra Leone. The fact that Freetown and Sierra Leone have gone through this very difficult time, for me, does not mean I should abandon it so I can continue to be comfortable elsewhere. I think we will never, and for those, particularly those who come on holiday and have so much to say about what's wrong, Look, we're never going to fix the challenges if our best minds, our best talent, our best professionals are giving everything they have to someone else's country and someone else's economy. It's not a walk in the park. When you are a post-conflict country, there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of building that capacity. And you're not always welcome. But if you feel there's a role you can play, and I can assure you there is a role you can play. You may not just walk into a cushy job. What I'm doing is not a cushy job. If I tell you what I get paid, you wouldn't believe it. I may as well, in fact, for me, this is charity. I'm not doing this for money. But there are people who can build businesses. And the more we have of like-minded people coming from abroad, joining hands with some fantastic people in country, the more we have people who are determined to see our country grow and develop, the greater the chances of that happening faster. So don't be wherever you are on social media, on Facebook, giving us all the advice from the comfort of your home. You don't have to come all at once, but begin to be a part of what we're doing. Invest, come, visit, come do 3 months, come do 4 months. I've got members of the Mayor Delivery Unit, and I will give a shout out to Madupa Williams, who came and said he was going to be part of my Transform Freetown Sector Working Group on urban planning. He worked pro bono for 1.5 years. If we have a building permit system now, it's because of what he's done. If we are moving forward with our cable car, which we are, to full feasibility stage, it's because of what Madupa has done. Let's not give lip service to Sierra Leone. Let's actually put our mouths, our money, and our talent and our time where our mouths are. If you don't do that, please don't give me advice on Facebook.
Perfect. Thank you. What a wonderful note to end on. Honestly, I could talk to you all night, but I know I'm not the only one who demands your attention. Thank you so much for spending the time with us today, Yvonne, and look forward to watching this journey.
And I look forward to seeing you in Freetown.
Yeah.
230-year anniversary in March. Save the date, the 7th to the 13th, a week-long celebration.
Wow. Thank you.